Alright, so let's get to it. This is BlackMom44 coming back at you, and we're just going to jump in. This is finishing up with Companion Lantry. So I think already we have a loyalty of 1, and he has no fear of us. So let's just talk.
At least in theory, I'm supposed to be observing history and not getting myself wrapped into it. All the same, this is the thrill of a lifetime. Rarely does one stand so close to monumental moments in the making. For the moment, the Scarlet Chorus could be considered an ally. Let us hope the Archon of Secrets continues to find you entertaining enough to remain friends. The Disfavored, on the other hand, will be a certain threat. The Civil War has removed Ash's pretense to play well with others. So, I must ask, are you planning on taking sides in the Civil War? Or do you have other plans?
So, let's say I'll hunt with the Scarlet Chorus. Got my own little corner of the Tears. I think for so long as it suits my purpose, I will work with the Scarlet Chorus. But, you know, I do like helping Neptunen, but I think I will work with the Scarlet Chorus for right now.
While Graven Ash knows more about war, I contend the Voices of Nerat knows more about victory. The Scarlet Chorus has grown with each passing year.
In many ways, the Yom the Conquest is largely an abstraction. Eventually, the Tears will be those who have joined the Chorus, and the corpses of those who refused. Best to be on the living side of that future.
Your fatalism does you credit, Scholar. Doesn't it feel good to be on the winning side for a change?
Whatever you do next, consider that many eyes will be upon you. For you have both delivered and taken away the Overlord's edicts, and few will know how to make sense of the latter. You are an exception the Archons cannot afford to ignore. They will likely aim to control or destroy you.
So, have you heard of edicts being broken before?
Most of Kairos' edicts were either worded to end in a manner of the Overlord's choosing, or the edicts have simply continued in perpetuity. That's not to say there haven't been stories of broken edicts. They're just uncommon. The oldest is, I think, Golbraith and the Edict of Sorrows, and that tale dates back to around the year 110. Aside from you, the most recent was the Edict of Twisting Grasses, back in 380. In all these stories, Kairos' edict very clearly gives its victim a single way to escape, and someone manages it. What's never happened is the pure abatement of an edict, like using a spell of warding or cancellation.
Have a moment? Let's talk further. So, what's on your mind? Did you want to discuss matters of the present, or would you prefer a more scholarly rant? I have some questions for you.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I'd like to know more about you. Me? Well, fine, but I'm not a very fascinating subject. I study interesting people, enough to know I'm not one of them. So, what's your story? Tell me the origins of Lantry. Someday, someone half your age will ask you to sum up your life, and you realize what an odious request that is. Well, where to start? I grew up in Sunder. I was born right after independence from the realm of Stalwart. So yeah, do the math and you realize I'm old. So that's, he's 84 years old. My parents were harbor hands. My mother never returned from a voyage, and my father lost his hand to infection and decided to sell me to the School of Ink and Quills. Any other family? Irrelevant. If they exist, they are strangers. Family ties are severed when joined with the Sages, at least in principle. School has had its share of favoritism for blood relatives. As a novice, I was assigned to the Dovicotes, where I learned how to raise and groom birds to carry missives. Most of my early tomes are on that subject. 10 years and several tomes later, someone decided I was ready to be welcomed into the inner circle and shown the ways of magic. Since then, I've spent a great deal of time in field study, which I suppose readied me for life after the fall of Vellum Citadel. Well, as much as anything could ready one for the strangeness of these days. So, were you born Lantry, or did you take that name on joining the School of Ink and Quill? Most sages take a new name when they join the school, but for me, the transition was difficult at first. I stuck to my old commoner name and then just never got around to picking some highfalutin name like Sage Apophysis or Sage Dangling Participle. Is this your true skein? Did you always want to be a sage? Cannot imagine doing anything different. I suppose in my youngest days I yearned for battle and glory like most boys I know. Having now seen how short a soldier's life can be, I look back on that old calling, that old mindset, and laugh. So really, what's your story? What do you mean by that? Let's speak of something else. I don't think that he's gonna tell me. Right? Yeah, not yet. How do you feel about Kairos? How can I not help but find him to be the most captivating person alive? The man has bent empires, claimed continents. Where he goes, history follows. I won't deny he has killed millions at least, but I contend more would have died in petty wars across Teradus in the void of Kairos. I've seen what tiny despots, merchant cabals, and mage guilds can inflict in the names of all sorts of righteous causes. I will take the rule of Kairos over the tyranny of every idiot on Teradus. Now let's speak of something else. We'll go back to
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
So, I'd like to discuss arcane matters.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know of Kairos' edicts? Kairos has cast many over the ages, and to my knowledge has never worded two edicts exactly the same. Edicts define our understanding of magic. Kairos' magic works over vast distances, over indefinite durations, and no archon or mere mage can counter the force of an edict. What can you tell of edicts in general? So I explain to my students like this. Spells to an edict as a drop of rain is to a hurricane. Edicts and spells are both magical cantrips, but different in intensity by orders of magnitude. Edicts are almost commands to Teradus that must be carried out until the instructions allow for the magic to end. If Kairos wants a plague until next Judge's Day, expect copious buboes until next Judge's Day. Nothing has ever dispelled an edict. Nothing outside of the edict's own sunset clause, as I like to think of them. I'm curious about a specific edict. Of course, ask away. So, any thoughts of the Edict of Execution cast on Vendrian's Valley? It seems like the Archons were about to kill each other, and the threat of mutual destruction was about all Kairos had left. I imagine fear is the only way to get someone like the Voices of Nerat to follow orders, and the Edict certainly did whip them into action. Of course, ask away. So, what do you know of the Edict of Stone? The Edict of Stone ravaged the realm of Azure. The upheaval of earth and rock turned the rolling plains into a craggy steppe known as the Stone Sea. Since the edict was directed at the traitorous Archon of Stone, it would seem the upheaval of Azure was a secondary consequence, though I imagine little of what Kairos does is unintentional. Of course, ask away. What do you know of the Edict of Fire? I know that you warned us. I'm alive today because of you, as are so many of my brothers and sisters. And I'm most certain you were not ordered to warn us, so all the more reason to honor your decision. Given the destruction involved, a warning seemed the most humane thing to do. Loyalty. Because he likes that. And loyalty 3, that's a huge boost. A most noble sentiment. The edict had its intended effect. It crushed the will of the school and scattered the sages to the wind. I'm glad it brought an end to the conflict and, thanks to your warning, without further loss of life. Of course, ask away. You tell me of the Edict of Storms. The Edict of Storms turned the once forested lands of Stalwart into a windswept wasteland. They call it the Blade Grave now, since only the iron and bronze armaments remain. Hurricane breezes, rust winds, and relentless lightning have destroyed the housing and farmlands. Let's speak of something else. Do edicts work on the same arcane principles as spellcraft and other magic?
Edicts are the strongest manifestation of magic we know, and they seem to violate all other lesser phenomena. No dispel cantrip has ever dented or abated an edict. Even archons with powers of great durability cannot shrug off their effects. Just look at Cairn. Now, what I find curious, edicts can flex a little. Or so my studies suggest this is the case. Take the Edict of Storms. While the day it was proclaimed was the most violent, the actual radius of the storm has changed over time. But most will have none of my hypotheses on this matter.
Fine, I'll take the bait. What's your conjecture about edicts?
So, in my studies, some edicts resolve some problem of the overlords and then vanish into history. But the edicts that linger around, almost all of them begin to widen. Their effects become more intense. Here's the intriguing part. The older the edict, and the more that's written about it, the more the reports of that edict get more dire over time.
Perhaps edicts have a life of their own once set in motion.
Something to that effect, at least. I contend that edicts are powered by fear. Fear of Kairos helps fuel the casting, and fear of the edict feeds the magic, sustaining it, and if enough people fear it, even growing it a bit.
So, or edicts just feeds off the landscape when set in motion. Look at what has become of Azure and Stalwart.
I thought just that. But wherever an edict is cast or has been cast, the land will always hum with a little background noise, if your ears trained to listen. If anything, it seems edicts add more magic into the world, not the other way around. Intellectual honesty demands that I study the matter more. If I'm correct, the more people fear and obsess over an edict, the stronger it becomes. Anyway, another study for another time.
So let's speak of something else.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know of the magic of the Archons? I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject, which is sad, because I feel like I've still so much left to learn. How does the magic of Archons work? The Archons all have magical powers that are intuitive. When the voices of Nerat pulls out someone's mind or Graven Axe protects its soldiers, that magic isn't a assigned spell or ritual. To them, it's closer to flexing one's hand. The Archons on the, what's the word for it? Axiom of magic, the root of magic, spell pioneers. I'm sure this analogy is off in many ways, but I see Archons as the mothers of original magic, and everyone else is just imitating them. Only the Archons can will magic into being. Okay? To confuse things a bit, some Archons learn to cast other spells in the same fashion as us lesser mages. If you are as important as an Archon, you learn quickly that all knowledge is power. I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject. So are all Archons loyal to Kairos? Officially, yes. In actuality, no. Those with the true gift for magic always come to the attention of Kairos. A few manage to evade attention for a bit. School of Tides was founded by one such uncontrollable, but these are history's exceptions. When we write biographies of the Archons, we often refer to them as exarchs, in their formative years before stepping into their prime. But officially, Kairos is supposed to grant all titles of Archon. It's quite the faux pas to self-appellate. Okay, so how is an Archon born? Or bred? I think we all dream of one day waking up and being an Archon. Given some of the madmen and loons that have exhibited mystical greatness, it can seem unfair that the rest of us can't do it. I can say with confidence, Archons aren't born, they become. Graven Ash is a good study of this. Before he was the Archon of War, he was a successful commander, each victory more daring and glorious than the next. Somewhere along the way, his leadership took on mystical qualities. The Graven Ash we know today can reach out and protect his soldiers from harm, but maybe at first he could just protect those near him. I wouldn't know for certain, but all will attest that he didn't have this power his whole life. Let's speak of something else.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
So what do you know of spellcraft?
I've forgotten more than most blood chanters have ever learned. What do you want to know?
Can you teach me anything?
Most certainly. I probably should have shown you how to mend wounds sooner. If you have a moment, I can show you the healing sigil I was trained to use.
No time like the present. So we'll start with the first principles. When mending wounds and easing pain, we invoke the magic of the orphan midwife, Archon of Rebirth. By invoking her sigil, we channel our mastery, however briefly, through our hands. Now trace the sigil, following the lines in the order I sketched them. What can you tell me about this Archon of Rebirth? Didn't realize you gave a care about your history. Well, the orphan midwife was born in 160, bound to Kairos in 201. They say where she walked, plants would sprout, the sick would grow vigorous. She'd also send most folks into fits of rage and animals into heat. She sounds like quite a riot. We know her magic by way of one of her first disciples, who migrated to the Tiers in 222 to spread her wisdom, an act that happened to be illegal under Kairos' law. For that and a host of other transgressions, the orphan midwife has been in prison for over a century, or so the story goes. Follow his instructions. Since this isn't your first cantrip, I'll move a little quickly, but I think you can keep up. So we have 5 control life. And so, if you need to heal pain as opposed to purge an infection, you move your hand like so, but you know, that's enough for now, and I think the rest you can figure out on your own. So what sort of magic did the sages teach you? Sage Sindon tutored me in the traditional sigils, those of preservation, concealment, and healing, as derived by the bygone archons of Theravis, Fading Wrath, and the Orphan Midwife. The preservation magic is largely functional, sealing parchment, binding books, that sort of thing. All of us chroniclers learn concealment magic, as our ideal method would be to study events without contaminating the decisions being made. As for the healing magic, many of us modern sages study this a great deal. School has a shoddy reputation among the common folk. I figure if they knew us as healers and caregivers, maybe we start to change opinions. Healing. Now that's a noble craft to study. More loyalty, we're at 4. Okay. True, but given how accident-prone I can be, I think the person that benefits most from my magic is me. But certainly, the most gratifying spells I know are the ones that ease pain and suffering. They make me feel slightly useful. What can you tell me about signing magic? Scholars don't have a good word for what Archons do when they cast magic. Can't tell you how Graven Ash casts his protection over his soldiers, nor would I know how Bled Mark consciously decides to move through a shadow. But when us mere mages want to cast a spell, we do so by signing the sigil of an Archon that previously discovered the magical phenomenon in question. It's debated whether Archons create new magic or just discover magic that was waiting for us, but such questions seem impossible to answer while sober. Let's speak of something else.
And I'd be happy to oblige.
Yeah, are you
Ever
happy
since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
Are you familiar with the Old Walls?
Familiar is a relative term. I think I know more than most, but it's a subject of mystery, even to the scholars. Though, I must admit, in addition to my reading, I've ventured into the Old Walls on occasion, and soiled many undergarments in the process.
Do you know who built them or why? We can only seem to agree that they were built. There's no consensus as to the who of it. We generally use the old realms or older realms when describing the folk that must have done all this construction ages ago. That's also where the young realms got their name. Indirectly, Azure, Stalwart, and all of them are older than you and I, but compared to the Old Walls, they're babies. As for the why, that's anybody's guess. I've always assumed it's an ancient road and an aqueduct network. If you just needed to fence off your neighbors, you wouldn't have such elaborate, expensive web masonry on the inside. Alright. What sort of things have you seen in the Old Walls? Aside from the terrifying Bane, well, every section of the Old Walls has its own jaw-dropping architecture. I've seen bridges that move when someone is near, mystical barriers that must have been standing for eons, and I've seen remains, so many remains, a lot of them sages from centuries past, or hapless drifters that must have been desperate for shelter. What fascinates me most are the symbols found in the interior architecture. I can't help but think if we shared notes with other Old Walls explorers, we might someday decipher the meanings. So Kairos forbids exploration of the Old Walls. Did the Tiersmen have similar laws? In typical Younger Realms fashion, entering the Old Walls was never illegal, but plundering them was. The logic being, That which rests in the old walls belongs to your local ruler, not you. The noble houses made a point of buying up anything that came out of the old walls. Plenty of ancient stuff in there, but sometimes you find stuff that's just a generation old, left by the last fool trying to search for treasure. If you've been through the old walls, you must be familiar with the Bane. More so than is healthy. I've seen one rip a young scribe in half with his nebulous talons, and I've run away from more than my fair share of angry Bane. They sound redundant. They all seem angry. Heard all sort of theories on the Bane. Heard they were dead mages, the nightmares of Archons come to life. One sage believes they're Kairos' children. Guess if you have enough ink and parchment, you can crap out any dumb idea. I profess to know very little and stick to what can be observed. They appear cunning, but lacking language, and they have animal-like qualities. But they seem drawn only to magic and commotion. Food and water seem irrelevant to them. Let's speak of something else.
And I'd be happy to oblige.
What do you
Ever
know of
since
the
fall of
spires? History used to say that the older realms built the spires. These days you hear children repeating that Kairos built them. Guess that's new history? There are spires all over Teradus. I don't know the count, maybe 40 or so. 5 of them are in the tiers, and generally the spires follow the old walls, often occurring at junctions in the old masonry. The mountain spire is a notable exception. The other spires in the tiers connect to the old walls, but the mountain spire is just freestanding, a sore thumb in the middle of the tiers. Any ideas to their purpose? Lightning rod, perch from which to survey the lands below, signpost for a society of folks that flew like birds. On this matter, I have only conjecture and flights of fancy. The best hypothesis I've heard is that they were all built at the sites of major settlements now long gone, so maybe their haphazard placement is a hint about how the maps of old might have looked. Though, any idea why magic works better near the spires? The sages liken the phenomenon to heat radiating from a candle. The air is just thicker with magic the closer you get to the spire. It can be deadly trying to work spells close to a spire if you aren't wise to the effect. I'd be famous if I could tell you why this happened. I've always assumed they are the magical equivalent of river sources. Just as water endlessly flows from certain special sites, so too are there places where magic pours endlessly from natural source. Any idea who built that structure on top of the mountain spire? Know any sculptures with superhuman strength and power to fly? If not, I'm out of ideas. Structurally speaking, it looks vaguely, and I do mean vaguely, similar to the sculptures in the old Academy of Tides, but if that were the case, I think we'd know more. Symbols on the structures certainly look like they could be related to the symbols found in the old walls. So I'm all but certain that structure was built by the same craftsman that built the spire. Well, let's speak of something else.
And I'd be happy
Speak
to
of
oblige.
other matters. Let us discuss current matters.
Of course. How can I help?
Know anything about the region we're in?
The spires predate us all. As far as I know, we're the only ones who've been up here since... ever? I think this might be a first. Perhaps the real Trailblazer had trouble getting down and was lost to history. Of course. How can I help?
What happens if we ask again?
The spires predate us all.
Alright.
Of course. How can I help?
What are your thoughts on our traveling associates?
Are you asking for an objective assessment? Or is this your way of saying you want to gossip?
Derek, what do you make of him?
You must have some leverage over him, as I would have thought he'd lead us into a disfavored trap long ago. Or maybe the Legion is just that polite? I must admit, I am completely fascinated by his predicament. Ever tried diagramming the articulations of his armor? Don't. It'll only lead to madness and ruination.
Thoughts on verse?
I know little of swordplay, and couldn't work a curve and arrow to save my life. I can't really comment on the lady.
Lady? You're just afraid to talk in front of me, clear as day. Your sweat is easier to read than your ink scribbles.
What? No, not at all. I just don't know how to comment on a warrior's worth, that's all.
Spare me your blather. Huh. Think that, do you? Didn't know you had such swollen hope for me.
No need to keep secrets, Lantry?
A most fascinating specimen. I think she has great potential. A dangerous amount of potential, to be blunt. The Scarlet Furies are the fighting elite of the Scarlet Chorus, and that means floating to the top of a sea of blood and chum. we should consider ourselves lucky to have her on our side, with her weapons usually pointed away from us.
Let's speak of something else. Questions
I
for
am
you?
nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I have questions about our allies and enemies.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly type about the armies, but do you want to talk about the Archons or other mages?
I want to ask about the Archons. I know much of such luminaries, so I'm careful with my words, but ask if you must. So tell me about Graven Ash, Archon of War.
Ash has served with Kairos for a mere century, but he has been a reliable general and level-headed warlord. Certainly when compared to some of the more bloodthirsty Archons to serve under Kairos. I'm not saying the disfavored are merciful. I'm just saying I've read the stories of the Archon of Blood and know it could be worse. I know Graven Ash can defend his soldiers from far away. Ash's Aegis is the term us Arcanophiles have taken to calling it. Not surprisingly, Graven Ash is beloved by his troops. I mean, if Tunon could mystically protect you from cudgels and sharp sticks from leagues away, you'd like him more.
Tell me about the Voices of Narad, Archon of Secrets. Voices of Narad is one of Kairos' most dangerous and unpredictable servants. He can pull memories, whole personalities, if you believe some reports from his victims, and over time, this has created a single Archon with the knowledge of countless lifetimes. Beyond that, I know he's served Kairos for close to 200 years. He was one of the generals of the War of Northern Unification. In Small World, Graven Ash was his enemy at the time. So, it's Northern Empire. It used to be the Northern Kingdom. What do you know of Tunon, Archon of Justice? First, I suppose I should ask what you know of him. He is true to his core mission. He is fair and just. Fair and just by your measure, that is. Almost. Tunon, Archon of Justice, exists in texts spanning back hundreds of years. I can't say I know how he came to be the Overlord's adjudicator. Maybe you know that one, but he oversaw the conquest of the Tundra Sovereigns. They bowed to Kairos in the year 83. Know anything about Blood and Mark, Archon of Shadows? Very little. His name was not printed in many texts. I know that he is sworn to Tunon and acts as his assassin. I know he goes back a long ways, though. I've long assumed he served Kairos about as long as Tunon, give or take. What of Siren, Archon of Song?
Not the youngest Archon in history, but certainly one of the younger, and history has yet to write much about her. And if I happen to be the first to write about her, well, that will look nice for my legacy.
Did you know Cairn, Archon of Stone? Of him, I know very little. I believe he was the wild man of the hills that Graven Ash subdued in 402, but only one source suggests that link. He was famous for being, well, a big sour jerk. Seems he let his mouth run off about Kairos, and that was the end of his story. Let's speak of something else. Some questions.
I am nothing if not a
What can you tell me of
semi-reliable
the
font
School
of
of
knowledge.
Ink and Quill?
You mean what's left of them? What would you like to know?
What's the core philosophy of the School of Ink and Quill?
The sages are archivists, academicians, and arcanists. Our mission is to preserve the knowledge of today for the good of tomorrow. Though we are known for our magic, few realize that most sages concern themselves with scribal work. Only a select few have the talent or focus to work the sigils. Each sage benefited from the scrolls of learning that came before him, and so each sage must repay this boon by gathering, authoring, or translating new texts to the stacks. But all that's a bit generous. It's no secret that the sages were far more happy to add knowledge than to share it.
Why did the sages resist Kairos?
Why, indeed. As historians, it is our place to document, not direct. Let others rage and resist. Ours is the duty to record. The decision to defy Kairos was not unanimous, nor one decided upon lightly. The laws of Kairos would forbid much of the knowledge contained in the Vellum Citadel. The elder sages feared, rightly perhaps, that the Overlord would put an end to our tradition of stockpiling knowledge. The Battle of the Vellum Citadel was a battle to preserve knowledge, but our actions will be remembered as treason against the will of Kairos.
Tell me a bit about the school's history.
The sages trace their days to a generation after Five Wives, when the first settlers moved west. The Vellum Citadel began as a scholastic retreat, slowly blossoming into the finest library in the continent across the generations.
So, Five Wives is the historic landfall of seafaring human settlers on the Tiers.
The centuries fly by, and suddenly, the Vellum Citadel is the definitive archive in the Tiers. The sages branched out into carrying missives for wealthy clients, training noble children to read. The peasants may have feared us, but we remained useful enough to the kings and queens of the Tiers to avoid war. When Kairos came to the Tiers, that's when our hubris came back to haunt us. The Elder Sages, the other Elder Sages, not I, believed our spellcraft was enough to ward off any siege. Well, we know how that turned out.
What sort of sigils do the sages practice?
Traditionally, we use magic only so that we may observe and archive, so that means magic of concealment and protection. But, in truth, we have amassed a great wealth of knowledge. Before the Vellum Citadel fell, any given subject of magic had at least one sage practicing it.
And let's speak of something else. Questions?
I am nothing if
So they
not
say
a
sages know
semi-reliable
all
font
sorts
of knowledge.
things.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that. What's on your mind?
Could you teach me something about history?
I'm flattered you think me that wise, but unless you are enthralled by migration observations and titillated by triangle ratios, I think I'd bore you silly.
But what better tangent than triangles?
Fine, fine. If you have truly nothing better to do than talk trivia with old Lantry, so be it. A Brief History of the Tiers by Sage Lantry. Volume 1, Settlers from the East. Dry land! Came the cry from the prow of the ship. After months in the deep ocean, the pioneers of the Tiers saw their promised land at long last.
Listen politely. Fascinating.
Volume 3, years 90 to 94. If you thought 88 was a crazy time when everything changed, wait until 91.
Really? Do go on.
Well, if you enjoyed that, you're going to love Ratios of the Sun. So, by using the shadow of a staff at noon as a starting point, I use triangles to show a relation.
But were your two measurements far enough to derive a parallax?
Ah, I knew someone would ask that. And yes, so here's my proof. Sage Winding Script shows a relationship between all half-square triangles. I have a diagram somewhere.
So if that's correct, you could estimate almost any length from a known angle.
Yes. Way to steal the concluding reveal from me. But yeah, that's about the gist of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my voice needs a rest. Thank you for the rousing conversation.
Alright, just so you're aware, we're not done with him. So, we have Wheel of Ages, because we have more loyalty. We are at 4. We need 8% and more 5, right? So let's keep speaking.
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
Some questions for you.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge.
So,
what
I
did you
have
want to
questions
discuss?
about our allies and enemies.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly type about the armies, but do you want to talk about the Archons or other mages?
What do you know of the mage guilds? More than I will readily admit. Which guild? What do you know of the Earthshakers? Takes a strange bird to wish to emulate Cairn, Archon of Stone, but what do I know? A whole cult sprung up to worship the man. This cult became known as the Earthshakers Guild, and even their weak imitations of his magic can fill the land with tremors. Cairn answered to Graven Ash, meaning the Earthshakers are military allies of the disfavored. At least that is how it was. Karen's treachery demand retribution from Kairos, and this has destroyed the reputation of the Earthshaker Guild. Many assume a traitorous teacher would breed traitorous disciples. Tell me about the Forgebound. Forgebound are a guild from the Northern Empire. Their magic is a bit different from the sigils you or I know. They study a slower, more rigid style magic that they use to become one with their forging tools. Forgebound know the secret of turning gray rock into fine iron, and none have yet replicated this feat of craftsmanship. What they do is truly unique, and they teach their craft by practice and lecture. Little of it is written down. What are the Blood Chanters? Blood Chanters are a motley. To call them a proper guild insults all other traditions. Most of their number were members of the School of Wild Wrath, but they sold their loyalty to the Voices of Narad. So, they're not storied, but rather a very recent organization. Okay. So, they brought with them their fire magic, adopted from the long-dead Thousand Embers, Archon of Fire. Gets itself a little surprised that fire mages would find a welcome home in the chorus. He lived from 26 TR to 73 TR. Had a knack for making things combust, and let's see when he died. But fire is now but one of their tricks. Their real trick is their magic of passion, frenzy, and fear. Such magic is based on the sigil of Siren, Archon of Song. Are there other guilds in the tiers? The big three, Ink, Tide, and Wrath, pushed out most of the other schools ages ago. History makes notes of the Cutters, the School of Flowering Winter, and a few others that did not survive the little wars our schools would wage. But I know little of these footnote schools. Let's speak of something else.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly
Something
type.
else?
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge.
So they say sages know
what
all
did you want to
sorts of
discuss?
things.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that.
So know anything about
What's
the
on your
Bane?
mind?
A shame Sage Cloven Claws was reduced to a pile of ash. Man knew all that's been written on the subject. Most of what we know is summed up in the name. Full term for them is Mage Bane, and there's a good reason for it. They'll prey on anything that moves, but they'll show favoritism towards magically active humans. Tell me about Wisps. They're largely inconsequential by themselves, hardly the menace most associated with the Bane, but these glowing little creatures often fall in the wake of Scourges or other larger Bane that can make them a real danger. What do you know of the Scourges? Writhing masses of sharpened limbs and quiet as a shadow, Scourges are the most frequently observed type of Bane. Not sure if they're the most numerous or just most likely to attack. What can you tell me of the Havocs? Notable for being territorial, by all accounts they stick to a chosen location, lurk, and lurk. If you see one, common wisdom is to run. It will give up chase, eventually, when you find the edge of its home. Know anything about the Malices? Most troublesome, the Magebane are the Malices. Though I've never experienced it, I'm told a Malice can take hold of your waking self, leave you trapped in a dream while it puppets you. If evidence of these creatures didn't predate Kairos, I'd think the Overlord the only creature powerful and cruel enough to breed the Malice. Do you know where these creatures come from? They seem to breed in the old walls, or at least that's where they exist in the highest concentration. Seems to be no social interaction amongst the Bane, no logical mechanism of grinding their privates to make little Banes. Speak of something else.
I know everything.
Know anything
except
about the
for who's
Beastmen?
been saying. My knowledge is largely academic, not to be mistaken for practical.
Know their origins?
The earliest settlers made note of the Beastmen, so they were here before us, but not before the older realms. By all accounts, the tribes do not have record of a time before the Old Walls. So, the logical conclusion is that they arrived after the Old Realms, but before Five Wives.
What of the tribes?
There have been thousands of tribes throughout history. Most dissolve within a Acquireman's lifespan. The stronger females branch off and make their own tribes with tougher names. Then the King of Azure rounds you up and puts you to work. The Stonestalkers are the most powerful of remaining tribes, thriving now that Azure has fallen. As for the rest, the old Talons of Frozen Cloud, the Trollhooks, the Kolakar, the Katvanas, the Jawsnap, all gone, I think. And then there's the Shadowhunters. They're all but extinct.
What do you know of their minds and mannerisms?
They are true to their names and live like beasts. Clothing and artifice seem to have little value to them, whereas rutting and killing are the reason they wake in the morning. But it would be a mistake to think them stupid. Ask any tamer and they'll tell you some stories of their cunning. The beasts are wanting in patience and diplomacy, but they are a clever bunch.
Where do their loyalties rest?
You'd want to ask the authority, Sage Quillborn. She lived with the Kolakar for a few span, back in 404. Some truly fascinating findings. She noted that every successful tribe has a singular female leader. It's Prima. She noted that beastmen show fluid loyalty to new matrons. They adapt well to changing leaders, but they never change the relatively simple but strict hierarchical model. Few beastmen have accepted fealty to Kairos. It would seem the notion of bowing to a person you have not seen in the flesh is insanity. This inability to bow to the Overlord will no doubt doom the species, for Kairos does not suffer such token insults.
So let's speak of something else.
I know everything.
That's all for now. Questions for you.
I am nothing if not
I'd like to know more about you. Really, what's your story? I know you're smarter than you act. Send me the same courtesy. I was on the take from the Voices of Narad, or at least an agent of his sent me to the School of Ink and Quill 30 years back. It'd be years later until I made the connection to the Archon. Most people think the war began 3 years ago, but the Voices of Narad had his hands in things sooner than that. I was part of that early invasion, an eager kid happy to accept a 30-year assignment that comes with an education. So what else aren't you telling me? You read the Edict of Fire. You read the Messenger of Kairos' judgment on my work. It was about then that I decided I need to take an interest in your skin. In truth, I'm deeply curious about any who have lived as vassals to Kairos' most supreme magic. When I heard you were proclaiming a second edict, I had to find a way for us to meet. Being tied in a prisoner camp was not the intended plan. So you advocating surrender to Kairos was the end of your long plan? Yes and no. When I first left, I was just happy to be getting educated by the sages on someone else's rings. My orders were simply to listen and report. As the time drew near, my commands were to win them over, a little at a time, to the notion of surrender. But I failed. The elders of the school grew defiant, and the militant minds won out. These are Tearsmen, after all. I didn't deliver the surrender and took the Overlord's edict to end what I was sent to do. Thank you for telling me. Now, no more secrets, understood? I will endeavor to earn your trust as best I can. Sorry to have given you reason for doubt. That's enough. Let's be going. Alright, so that is Lantry. We still don't have full with him or with Barrick. We will gain that in time. For now, I want to thank everyone for watching, and join me on the next bit of this as I travel to Tunan's court and basically get everything squared away. So for now, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Have a great day. Black Mamba 44, out.